Good afternoon, everyone. PlusAI is one of the major players in the autonomous trucking space, working with their Triton international partners. So it looks really good, right, if you read the headlines. But as Lauren was just saying, hey, nothing happens unless you can take these trucks on the road. What does that look like? Is it full sailing, clear sailing, or something else? So we have two experts here to help dive into these issues, and I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Finch Fulton to my right.
Hello, everybody. I'm Finch Fulton. I'm currently with K&L Gates, but in the past, I served in the Trump administration as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy, and I was the President's nominee to be Assistant Secretary of Policy of the U.S. Department of Transportation, where I handled the innovation portfolio, which included all of the updates to policy and guidance for automated vehicles and autonomous trucks. Afterwards, I went to an autonomous trucking startup called Locomation, God rest its soul. And about 2 years ago, I went to K&L Gates, where I do government affairs and policy work.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Earl Adams Jr. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Regulatory Affairs here at Plus. I do want to take a point of personal privilege to thank Finch and Richard for coming and participating in today's session. I have about 20 years experience as a regulatory lawyer. Prior to joining Plus, I was with an international law firm in the Transportation Regulatory Group. Before that, I served as the Deputy Administrator at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration in the prior administration, where I oversaw the team that was developing the rules, the first set of what we thought were going to be guidelines relating to autonomous vehicles. So very much looking forward to this discussion, and take it from here, Richard.
Okay. Well, to set the stage a little bit, when you talk about regulations for autonomous vehicles, you have to look at both the federal and the state levels. And of course, looking around the world, each country has a certain way of doing things. But we now have 25 states who expressly allow autonomous vehicles to operate. There's one major outlier, and we're going to talk about that. But that's pretty good. It's not the whole country, but that's a lot of freight can run on those 25 states. But there's some others that push back, so we have to consider that. But it's interesting to look at what the public sees right now is the robotaxis, mainly Waymo. And the public is warming up more and more and more. I think it's fair to say the news articles, something a little happens here or there, but it's pretty good. So I think we'll see some interplay with that, sort of preparing the ground for trucking to happen. Let me start with you, Earl, in terms of what's happening with the states and the sort of opportunities you see there.
I was asked the question, how do I feel right now relating to the regulatory frame sort of landscape for autonomous trucking? And not to be naive, but I have to say I'm more than cautiously optimistic. We've seen in the last 2 weeks alone action both on the federal level. So Secretary Duffy making an announcement relating to the innovation portfolio for the Department of Transportation, which is going to include a big piece of it with autonomous vehicles, and then that outlier state that you're talking about, California. Now the fourth largest economy in the world, just this past week, put out a proposal for autonomous vehicle testing and deployment for heavy duty vehicles. So we are now, some like to say we're at an inflection point. I think we're beyond the inflection point. I really think that the regulatory lag has now caught up with the technology, and we are at a really good sort of convergence point now, where the regulations and the economics of autonomy are all coming together in a really good way. So again, I'm very optimistic about it.
Okay, we'll kind of come back around to that side of it, but on the federal side, Finch, tell us what's happening there.
Well, if I can start with thinking about how California is looking at this. So California's proposal for autonomous trucks sets certain levels and certain requirements for autonomous truck developers. Now, I don't think they got it perfect, for sure. There's some things that I find arbitrary and aren't commercially viable, but honestly, it's not the worst thing in the world. One of the things that I think is fundamental is they look at a safety case approach for ensuring the safety of the autonomous vehicle. That is what, in 2019, the U.S. Department of Transportation said, we should explore, this is how we should regulate in this space, a safety case-based approach, which is how they do it for submarines, it's how they do it for nuclear reactors, how they do it for aviation. How do you make the case that you're deploying the vehicle safely? What are your claims? What's the evidence to back that claims? And how do you routinely monitor that to ensure you're still hitting those same performance points? Fundamentally, that's how California's looking at it, and that's how the U.S. Department of Transportation is looking at it. And many of the same people that were with me in the first Trump administration have come back around, including the Deputy Secretary, Steve Bradbury. Now, Steve was critical on the development of some key policy documents like AV 3.0. This is the one that was the first autonomous vehicle document applied to trucking. And a recent study showed that after they provided clarity on how we were going to address the role of the human in driving the truck or operating the truck and asserting that the driver can be a human or a machine, $6 billion in direct private sector investment flowed into the industry. So many of the same players are coming back, and they have the same clarity. They want to take a safety case-based approach to ensuring the safety of the vehicle. They want to allow autonomous trucks to be able to perform, and I believe soon will update the FMCSA requirements that Earl got to spend so much time working on to be able to address all of the other things that a human does to ensure the safety of a truck. How do you take care of those requirements when there's no human present that's able to react within a moment's notice to anything happening on the road or happening outside of the vehicle? Those are very straightforward updates when you look at them on a one-to-one basis. So I think and hope that we should see that in those proposed rulemaking before the end of the year. You got to get that done if you want to get the final rule done before the end of this term of the Trump administration. So
Right.
They have to feel urgency, but I think there's clarity on the path forward, and they have direction from the president to the secretary down into FMCSA and NHTSA, the key regulators, on the fact that they need to move forward and how to do that on top of it.
And actually, Richard, if I can just to tag on, the beautiful thing about it and why, again, I'm so optimistic is that we're finding that the idea of creating a federal framework is a bipartisan issue. So AB 3.0 that came out of the Trump administration spoke to the safety-based case approach. The regulations, the proposal that the prior administration was putting together also focused on a safety case-based approach. If you look at members of Congress or both sides of the aisle are talking about a safety-based case approach. So this is one area where there is, God forbid I say this, agreement, across the political spectrum as to the benefits that can come with a baseline of safety. For regulation, because what we also know is that this is going to be an iterative process. It's not going to be just one rule. It's going to be multiple rules. But what we have to do is at least start with that baseline, and we can then build from there. You asked me the question. I didn't directly answer it on the state side. What we see right now in the states it's a patchwork sort of framework where each state is doing its own thing. Right now, Plus is we're doing our on-road testing in Texas. Texas has very much leaned in order to become, I think it's fair to say, one of the epicenters of autonomous vehicle testing and deployment. And that is great. And the state has created an entire apparatus and infrastructure, I think, to support the AV developers. But you go right next door in Arizona, there's, yes, there you can still operate, but there are additional requirements that one must give in order to be able to operate. So that type of, and then if you go one state over, you hit, I think if my geography is correct, Nevada might be there first, but you get to California at some point, and then you have to stop. So I think that 50 state patchwork approach has been beneficial to date, and it has allowed, as you saw with AV, from the federal policy statement and then the growth that came from an investment standpoint, it has been okay up until now. And I think all of the AV developers and our OEM partners have really leaned in, are doing great things. But when we can get to the next level of this national framework, it will then open up an entirely new world for us to move.
Well, since we're sitting in California, of course, everything that happens in California makes total sense. But back in 2013, California was the leader across the whole country and basically across the world, creating regulations that started the robotaxi world. And for some reason, and that's going to be my question to one of you guys, Why did it exclude trucks? It was so successful in creating the robotaxi scene. What's your thought about that? And how does that play into today?
Politics.
Politics.
So the law, of course, in 2013 said, thou shalt pass regulations that enable automated vehicle deployments. It didn't specifically say both for robotaxis and for autonomous trucks. So the regulators took that opportunity to say, let's only do robotaxis. Let's only do vehicles under 10,000 pounds because there's lots of questions and concerns among both organized labor, regular truck drivers, and some of the other trade groups that we know but may not be as widely known about what this could mean for workforce impact. So we just won't look at that. We won't touch it. We'll ignore it for a decade.
Yeah.
I'm sure nobody will notice. But what that means is as the regulators are catching up with the technology, we got to make sure that we address those concerns head on. What we've seen is there is no real ability for an autonomous trucking company to drive any human trucker out of a job based on some basic stats, right?
Of course.
Demand is increasing. It's going to double by 2035 and go beyond that by 2050. There's a shortage of truck drivers today of, I believe it's 60,000 jumping to 80,000. Pandemic student out of whack.
Yeah, 80,000.
Turnover is over 70% at the average among the trucking companies in general. And some major trucking companies, it's over 100% a year. So you're not even going to get a chance, even if you wanted to displace even any human truck driver. They'll still be in demand in the future. The truck driver of the future will still be able to train and choose the type of job that best suits them, be trained for and choose the sort of job that suits them. And their overall economy will grow, and there'll be an overall net increase in jobs available in the overall trucking space. Some things that many people in this room don't know, or that know very well, but many of the people back in DC don't know, is the majority of the jobs in trucking are not in the truck. All the other jobs in the ecosystem continue to grow and grow and grow. There will still be demands for the long-haul truck drivers, still be demands for people that can do those human routes, the ones that are now routine,
right.
The ones that may have differences and nuances. You're still going to need the humans. But in the meantime, the truck drivers that choose the job of the future and want something a little bit different, where they can get home every night, where they can see their families, where they're not stuck on the road for an average of 18 days at a time, those are the people that will be able to choose those jobs and to potentially have a better quality of life and better pay, which is what we see if we just look at the basic statistics and the basic layouts of the facts, provided by organizations like CDC and the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, but just the basic facts as they play out. So this is probably going to be a net positive and won't even have a chance of taking anybody's job or anything like that. But if you don't go talk to the human truck drivers about this and you just sort of hide behind your trucking company and hope that something happens, you don't have to deal with them, they assume every truck on the road is going to take one or more jobs from a human truck driver. And that just isn't going to, it couldn't happen if we wanted it to, right?
Yeah, it's just more complex than that, totally.
So you got to go talk to the truck drivers, the organized and the disorganized truckers, and make sure that they hear you and that you're meeting them where they live, not where you want them to be.
Yeah. Finch, you so much as you said, I 100% agree with. Richard, with respect to California, when I think about my time in the prior administration, I had a lot of conversations with California D&D, and they understood the need to engage on it. Okay. As Finch pointed out, it's a very dynamic, complex issue, but there was always an understanding that there had to be engagement. And the reason why is because, the future was then. It's today. There is deployment happening. There is activity. And there are jobs that are being lost in California that are going to places like Texas and otherwise, in order to help support it. And so I think that what we are is, as I said before, is that the regulatory lag is now catching up. It takes a while. The process is complex, and we still are not. For all within the industry, we're very excited about what California did. But as we know, who's ever tried to do a rule, we know that we're at least a year away from there actually being the first permit that might be issued where you can have some type of deployment. But it's still, I think, overall, it's going to be a net positive. Let me just one thing, and it does connect to the regulatory approach. But what you said, Finch, about talking and engaging, I can't yell that loud enough from as many rafters as possible. And plus, we talk about the 3 E's when it comes to public engagement. That's education, exposure, and evaluation. So we try to educate the public around the benefits of autonomy. We try to expose them as often as regular as possible to autonomy. It's not by surprise when you go and talk to people in Austin who see Waymos on the road, their understanding or take on autonomy is different than someone I was in San Marco, where they've never seen it, and the mayor is just aware that the state has said that these trucks can run through her town. So we try to expose as much as possible, and then we try to provide the evaluation, the data that backs up our assertions of the benefits. But the fourth one is evangelizing, and that evangelizing is this whole thing of talking to everyone. It's going and engaging and having the hard conversations, not just with regulators, but it's also with truck drivers. It's also with carriers, to make them understand that this is going to be a net positive. This is not going to, we're not going to go from when we reach our commercial deployment date with our OEM partner in the next couple of years, it's not going to go from one truck to 700,000 AVs on the road. That's not the universe that we are living in. And so as a result, there is time for us to work together, find points of collaboration in order to plan from a upscaling of jobs, identifying new and creating new jobs. All of this will be able to work, and this ecosystem is going to have a benefit, is going to have a net positive benefit for everyone who's engaged, where it's all said there.
Excellent point. And I think I want to jump back to the federal side. We touched on that a little bit. To educate folks, if you're not tuned into this stuff, because it gets very deep, very geeky. We talked about 25 states allow autonomous operations, and yet some states don't. And why is this at the state level anyway? We've got NHTSA regulations that are all about vehicles. Well, as it turns out in the U.S., if something is not expressly prohibited, it's permitted. So the regulations that go back years and years, they're silent about autonomy, because who was thinking about that years ago? And so here we are in this strange situation where the states kind of allow it, but tacitly it's allowed anywhere in the U.S., whereas in Europe and much of the rest of the world, if it's not expressly permitted, it's prohibited. And that's one reason we're kind of a hotbed here in the U.S. So we touched on some of the aspects of the administration and Congress. So who has to do what? Can most things be solved by the administration making declarations, or what does Congress have to do? Finch, you want to start on that?
So in my youth and naivety, I used to say Congress doesn't need to do anything. The Department of Transportation has the authorities it needs. And then the Department of Transportation didn't use those authorities quickly enough. So what we need Congress to do is to tell DOT to do its job. That's it. It'd be great if that's all they said to do. But we need the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to move forward with the AV safety framework. And again, I don't think it's that far off from what California's thinking, except the very specific mileage-based requirements, some things that I disagree with, but fine. Safety case-based approach, we all agree to that. If they move forward with that, and it's fundamentally how the national framework's looking, that's a plus. On the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration side, they need to move forward the rules on the safe operations of every other part of the vehicle, the cargo inspection, the first responder interactions, things like that. How do you make sure you take care of all the other pieces? If you just had those two things, we'd be gravy. That would be the main things you need. And Secretary Duffy on Thursday announced a few key things. One is there's a weird loophole in the exemption system. If you are introducing new technologies and you're a foreign entity, you have a simpler process than if you're a domestic entity trying to test some of the same things. So he just provided an equality in how the DOT handles it and the speed at which they can handle it. He also just updated some of the standing general order requirements. One thing that, crash requirements, I mean. One thing that I think most people don't know is industry is calling for those to be strengthened, right? It was done as an emergency order instead of going through the full notice and comment process. It needs to be legitimized and strengthened. And then they need to allow the states like California to be able to plug into that database and get the information they need about any crash that happens. Industry wants this because they'd rather report it one time and get it right and be able to work with one set of regulators and then share it instead of having to send it out 50 plus times to any state that may need it, right? And also slightly different requirements. So industry is calling for that to be strengthened. This is the first step in that process. And also, part of the announcement that was lost is he's really emphasizing updating the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards to allow for a vehicle to be driven by a machine instead of necessarily a human. That's more regulatory text cleanup, where it's like addressing, this requirement needs to apply to the human driver in the left seat, the driver's seat, They have to be able to use the blinker with their left hand and click it 3 times to be able to make it signal to the left. They clear all that, and they just said, when the vehicle needs to turn left, it needs to indicate that it's turning left to outside users.
Yeah.
Ignoring all those manual controls. It's simple cleanups like that.
Right. That's good. That's good. And we have a, one of the more unusual requirements in the federal regs is the notorious warning triangle issue. So for those of you who don't think about this every day, a truck driver, if they need to pull to the side of the road, they are required to get out of the truck and grab a little reflective warning triangle that's placed 100 feet behind the truck. So these guys are walking on the shoulder to do that, probably the most dangerous part of their job. So had, autonomous trucks come along, well, hang on, there's no human inside. How's that going to happen? And there have been talk about, get a robot dog or something to do it. However, I'll stop talking there. And Earl, why don't you tune us in on where that is and what the prospects are to somehow modernize that situation?
Yeah, modernize is the right word. As you said at the top, when many of the rules relating to the operation of commercial vehicles were put in place, no one thought about, self-driving truck. And so there are several requirements that require a human being, some form of a human intervention in order to do it. And so the warning triangles is one industry. For whatever it's worth, I was in my role when when a exemption application was submitted by the industry in order to come up with a solution to solve the issue. Comes what it boils down to is being able to show that there is some alternative which is going to the same or equivalent level of safety than those 3 triangles. So something that indicates to the traveling public that this vehicle is pulled over to the side. And so industry put forth an idea. The prior administration, it was a Christmas surprise. Some would say that, in this hyper political world, that I would never criticize my prior bosses. Well, I'm going to criticize that. The day before Christmas, FMCSA issued a denial of that request. Less than 40 days before the new administration was going to take over. I wasn't there, so I don't know the propriety of why they did it or why they didn't do it, but the effect of it is that they still left open a very big question, a threshold question that has to be dealt with as we're looking at for full deployment of these vehicles. Because as it stands right now, you could still have in Texas, you could have a developer that wants to do a driver out commercial runs, but they would have to be able to, within the timelines required by the regulations, if that vehicle pulls over to the side, they would have to intervene. So again, when you're looking at the efficiencies that are supposed to come from AVs where you don't have human intervention, that actually begins to eat away at it. And so where we stand now is that denial has been challenged in court. I think that there is a better than average chance, if I was a betting man, that the current administration is probably on their own initiative going to take another look at that application.
It would be part of the NPRM. It would be part of the
Exactly. And they could take that on themselves in order to resolve it. One of the things, not to get too much into the weeds, but FMCSA regulates the operations of the truck. The system is built on the ability for there to be some although the rulemaking takes a long time through the exemption process, it allows for the agency to catch up with technology. And so I think that there's as I said, a really good chance that this issue and perhaps a few others that it currently involve a human intervention, that FMCSA will probably take a look at that, whether it's through an NPRM, sort of a comprehensive NPRM proposal of rulemaking, or individual efforts with respect to individual exemption applications.
Yeah, and I think that we are pretty close to it as well. Can't say exactly how they're going to resolve it, but FMCSA, under President Biden and future President Buttigieg, received a similar exemption petition for warning markers. And again, the only requirement is that you put out warning markers at 4 and 40 paces within 10 minutes, very specifically within 10 minutes. This is the only regulatory commercial barrier towards autonomous trucking. That 10-minute requirement. So about a month after Waymo and Aurora submitted their exemption petition, a company called Pi Variables submitted their exemption petition for warning markers that would drop off the truck, drag behind the vehicles, and achieve the same purpose. FMCSA said yes to that. There's your path forward. FMCSA determined they have enough information that they can say yes to pi variables for their warning marker technology. Why can't we use that same approach? Put on whatever requirements you need of these trucking companies. Have them do data requirements, reporting requirements. You can put limitations on the number until the rule's finalized. Geographic reporting requirements. We did the same thing when we said yes to Neuro's exemption petition. If anybody's familiar with the little package delivery vehicles that have done Super Bowl commercials with Domino's or Papa John's, think Domino's. These little pizza delivery vehicles, we put on very prescriptive. The crazies in the Trump administration got very prescriptive with the types of data they demanded from this private sector company delivering pizzas to say, you will give us exactly this information, we will approve every route, we're going to have all of this information, and we use that to update the key rulemaking, it's the occupant protection rulemaking, but the updates to the standards to allow for these driverless operations. We have a path forward. We've seen the Trump 45 administration do it. We saw the Biden administration do it. It's time to apply this pathway, this same technology for autonomous trucks. I don't see why it should take very long. I think it can happen very quickly. And I do believe, and I hope, and I call on this administration to get it done sooner rather than later, because there's a whole industry waiting and a whole bunch of private sector investments waiting to unlock this golden age of American innovation and transportation.
I bet none of you listening expected to get such a geeky dose about Washington. But, the good thing is we're not talking about, we're going to have to wait for the federal government just to enable deployment. We've got a lot of this covered. And you can deploy right now with a fully driverless commercial truck. You might have to have a guy sitting in the passenger seat who's responsible for those triangles. So a real quick perspective on this question, then I have a closing question. So Trayton, your Plus's partner, likes to sell lots of places in the world, not just USA. How does Europe look in terms of the regulatory space? Either one of you.
Yeah, no, I think that Europe is, as you said, by virtue of the, if it's not expressly permitted, then it's prohibited. There is and then you layer on top of it the EU system versus the individual member states. It's a very complex situation. However, there are several countries, Germany, Great Britain, have expressly allowed for it to happen. There's still the ability to whether or not you can cross state line, country, international lines, but there is a great deal of training and testing that is happening that we are doing right now with our partner Trayton, with Scania and MAN, their partner, their brand in Europe right now. And so we are excited about the prospects in Europe. We're also, just to broaden even more, we made an announcement with Tier 4, where we are going to be their partner in bringing deployment of AVs in Japan as well. So Japan is another country that is leaning in right now with respect to AV deployment. So I think from a global standpoint, there is just as many opportunities as we're seeing here in the U.S. and on the horizon.
Okay. And I think, as I said at the top, 2025 is looking to be an inflection point. There's several of the players in the space are going full driverless commercial. At least they've said they will. We haven't seen confirmation of that. 3 truck players. Plus is on a timeline along with others to get this out by 2027. Things are really cooking. So my question to both of you, as you see the robotaxi action going on, as you see others coming out, what effect does that have for the whole industry? Particularly the robotaxi side?
Yeah, well, the good thing about when people ride in a Waymo, when people ride into a Zoox, they are automatically, and we've seen statistically, measurably, a lot more comfortable with the operations. When you tell somebody, are you afraid of this robot that you've never seen or heard of, you've never seen one operate, but it's scary, right? They go, yeah, it sure does seem scary. And then they ride in a Zoox vehicle, and you're like, how was that? They're like, well, it wasn't scary. That was nice. I liked that. Yeah. I would put my kids in that to take them to soccer practice so I don't have to. I can't wait for that day. Let's do that. And it's going to be the same way with autonomous trucks, I believe. Some of this data is a little out of date because it's from my locomotion days, so I haven't updated it. But there was an old study that showed that about 2/3 of people, if you say, are you comfortable driving on the road near an autonomous truck? They say, oh, no, that sounds scary. 2/3. AAA did a study, same year. Do you feel comfortable driving near commercial motor vehicles? 78% said no. I know I don't like that. people don't like driving near trucks because they're big and scary. If it's autonomous, now it's not a one-for-one, so I'm not pretending that people are more comfortable with autonomous trucks than trucks, but it's how you ask the question, how familiar are you with this? People have been on the road with trucks. There's a lot of excellent, wonderful truck drivers on the road, but scary things happen, and they see that, and they internalize it. When they see how these autonomous vehicles, whether they be the robotaxis, the Zoox vehicles, or some of the autonomous trucks, see how they operate and handle situations to get more familiarity with them, they will become much more comfortable with them. The more they understand it and see it, the better off they'll be. So I do think public acceptance is a lagging factor. I think you still have to go engage people up front so that they're not having this imposed on them and not being surprised by it. But nothing beats exposure, right? And nothing beats real experience with
It's my second E, exposure.
Okay, so Earl, you get the last word.
Well, again, thank you all so much for coming in and being a part of this. It's been a great discussion. As I said, I will end where I started. I think that we are at a wonderful convergence point where the regulations around AVs and the technology and the investment are all coming together, which is just, because of the overall net benefits that we all know will come from the deployment of autonomous vehicles. It is really a good net. And, that being said, the regulatory process is anything can be surprising. So, we're going to continue to be engaged. We're going to be on Capitol Hill. We're going to be in state capitals to make sure that we are doing, our job in educating the legislators, the rule makers, the regulators, so that they can understand it. But we're not gonna give up because we understand that it's a great thing, and in the end, I think it's going to benefit us all. So,
Okay.
Very excited.
Thank you, Earl. Thank you, Finch. It's been a great discussion. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.